Hi, I'm Jimmy. In this video, I'm looking at the crazy news that GE could be a fraud. So here's what happened. So Harry Markopolos came out and said that he believes that GE is a fraud. He issued a 175-page fraud report, essentially going through everything that he found. Now, if the name Harry Markopolos sounds familiar, well, that's likely because he was one of the first whistleblowers on Bernie Madoff. So he researches Bernie Madoff's fund. He goes to the SEC a few times, tells him that Madoff is a fraud. He was ignored, but turns out obviously that he was correct. So clearly, him calling out GE for also being a fraud shouldn't be taken lightly. Now, in the name of full disclosure, I actually don't own any shares of GE. I'm not long, I'm not short, I don't have any position in it. But I have issued 2 different videos on it. My first video was about a year ago. There I said, stay away from it. I think the business needs to be further developed or it has to recover before we get involved in it. And that had nothing to do with fraud. Then a month or 2 ago, we did another video. There we said it could be a good long-term investment if we're willing to deal with some volatility. Again, nothing to do with fraud, but just so on the level, I have no interest in whether or not this thing goes up or down. That being said, it's likely that the pushback that we're going to hear is that Markopolos was paid either before or after he wrote the report. I'm not sure which. But either way, he was paid by a hedge fund that seems to be short the stock. And this could easily be interpreted as a conflict of interest. How much was he paid? Well, I haven't been able to find that anywhere. Who was the hedge fund? Turns out Markopolos isn't saying who it was or how much they paid him. Now, personally, I don't know what to make of this whole thing. GE has come out and said flat out that none of this is true. All of the information that they put out is correct, and nothing that Markopolos says is accurate. Frankly, what else would GE say? So our question is, what do we believe? Do we believe what GE is saying, or do we believe the GE fraud report? Well, I find this whole thing a bit tricky to deconstruct. On one hand, many different parts of Markopolos' GE fraud report seem a bit too promotional for my taste. Take a peek at this. All these slides I took directly from the report. Okay, so with this particular one, they went with the Best Buy looking header. Not terribly important. I just thought that was funny. Why do that? But whatever. But this is what I mean by promotional. So clearly he's calling GE fraud. But by tying GE's fraud to another fraud in Enron, well, people are naturally going to jump to the conclusion that it's a fraud. Now, this alone is likely enough to get some people to sell the stock. And the stock right now, last I saw, is down about 15%. So for any short investors, that's probably making them a decent amount of money. Now, we're not even 100% sure that they're actually short the stock. I read that they bet against the stock. So in theory, it's possible that that hedge fund actually bought put options instead. So if that is true, well, this 15% drop would be worth a fortune today. Okay, moving on. Again, this is the part that I find interesting. To me, to put a GE logo next to the face of Bernie Madoff seems very suspect to me. And when we read the title, GE fails the Madoff test, returns are too good to be true, well, then he goes on to say that the GE industrial business revenue weighted average profit margins are 14.7%. They're better than Madoff's 12% returns. To me, that's an insane thing to include that their profit margins are 14.7%. 3M has profit margins of 19%. Last year, they put up 19%. And they're in a very similar business as GE's industrial business. Disney has profit margins of 18%. Verizon has 16% profit margins. So calling it a fraud and tying the face of Bernie Madoff next to it feels like he just wanted a way to include Bernie Madoff's face into the report with GE. So I recognize that it's possible that they're using these very dramatic titles and interesting looking slides just to try to capture people's attention and in theory, draw them to the more important information. Because so far, a lot of this has been pretty suspect. But there are a few good points in the report that are really the centerpiece of the fraud allegations. So GE owns a healthcare insurance business. Its long-term healthcare policies that GE has sold in the past, well, this report claims that GE has understated their exposure by $18.5 billion. And this may very well be true. So the way this type of policy would work and the way this type of thing could happen is that any insurance company is going to have to make estimates when they go ahead and they write the policy. So maybe they say, okay, the average person is going to live until they're 75 or 80 years old or whatever, whoever they're writing the policy for. They're going to pick an age. They're going to say, okay, they're going to live till they're 80 years old and healthcare costs are going to cost us X number of dollars per year. That's the amount that they're trying to insure. Well, if the people that they quote don't live until they're 80, but instead that they live until they're 90, and we all know that healthcare costs have been way up, so in theory, the expense could be crazy high. So in theory, GE's long-term healthcare exposure would be way more than what they're actually quoting. Now, this GE fraud report says that its shortfall is about $18.5 billion, which is huge relative to what they're actually listing. So if GE is in fact hiding how much exposure they really have, well, this could be devastating to the long-term sustainability of General Electric. Now, if it's fraud or just clever accounting, I'm not sure, and I'm not 100% sure it really matters. If we did own shares of GE, what would our best move be? Again, this is really tricky to say. I've been waiting to hear from GE. I'm curious what GE comes out and says about this. I'm expecting at some point Larry Culp, the CEO of GE, is going to have to come out and take a stance and explain things a bit deeper than they already have. I think it's very possible that GE has glossed over their potential exposure, and that's what the GE fraud report ultimately says. It's very possible that they have, in fact, glossed it over, and if that's the case, I think that they're going to have to be more transparent. And I believe that there needs to be accountability for anybody who has knowingly contributed to glossing over the facts. I think transparency is key for any company. Now, I do think, like I said, that some of the GE fraud report was played up a bit. Perhaps it was for the hedge fund that is short the stock, or perhaps it's just to try to grab people's attention. But ultimately, the question for us is, if we own shares of the stock, do we want to invest in it? If we're considering investing it, is this a buying opportunity? And I think a lot of that comes down to a gut check. I think that if we can stand the turmoil that's likely to come out in the next days or weeks or months, and this is likely to drag on for a while, if we can stand that, then by all means, it might make sense to sit here and hold. If we think it's unlikely, we're really going to have to draw our own opinion on that and how important is the GE part of our portfolio to our overall portfolio. It's going to be different for everybody. And if we can't deal with the likely constant flurry of new news that will come out from this, well, it could be smart just to cut our losses at this point. Now, sometimes for me, I think it makes sense to do something like the sleep test. Basically, if you're going to lose sleep over this type of investment, it probably makes sense to find better investments. But what do you think? Do you think that GE is straight up committing fraud here? Or are they hiding the truth in clever accounting? Or is this fraud report exaggerated just to try to make anybody who's short selling the stock a bit richer? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit the thumbs up. If you haven't done so yet, hit the subscribe button. Thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of the video. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.